Shabbat Shalom. And welcome to what you may already know is Refugee Shabbat, which is a program of Hayas about which there is much information on the tables outside. Information you might not know is that information came from the 2020 COVID-canceled Refugee Shabbat that's been living in Jackie's house since then. So take that information so that it's finally come home. Tonight we have the great merit to learn from CBE member and Hayas Senior Director of Community Engagement, the extraordinary Isabel Burton. To start, I'm going to share a bit of Torah to help ground us in why we are participating in this evening. Then Isabel will tell us what's up. And then I'll share some CBE-specific ways that you can get involved, that we can get involved in supporting refugees and asylum seekers in Brooklyn and beyond. I also just want to take this moment to offer tremendous gratitude to some of our phenomenal leaders, Refugee Task Force co-chairs Bonnie Kirker for all that you have done to get us to this weekend and so much more that we are doing, and Jackie Schicker for your years of work. Gail Kaufman and Karen Levenberg, the chairs of our democracy team, whose work has begun to dovetail quite meaningfully into our Refugee Task Force work. And to student Rabbi Evan Trailer, who has shepherded some of the action steps that you'll hear about later this evening. So here we are in Parshat Teruma. And we find there the instructions for how we are to build the Mishkan, the tabernacle, that will carry with us on our 40-year journey through the wilderness. First, we receive the blueprint for building the Mishkan itself. And then immediately next, we get this very specific instructions on how to build the ark, the container, which will travel inside the Mishkan and will contain God's own words to us, written on the tablets forged atop Mount Sinai. It is the holiest center of holiness. And God explains how to make it, saying that its covering, its top, should have two angels, one on either side, looking inward, their wings cast over it in a protective posture. And ufnehem, it says, the faces of these angels shall be ish el achiv, shall face each other as a man faces his brother. V'no'adati lechasham, and God says there, between those faces, is where I will meet you. So the first thing to note is probably the most obvious. Where we find God, unmitigated gaudiness, is in the place where one face meets another face and recognizes there his brother, her sister, their sibling. That is holy space. But why? To discern that, we have to plummet back into the worst moments in Mitzrayim, to the second to last plague, the plague of darkness. When this choshech, this darkness, descends, it's described as a darkness so thick that you can touch it, such that lo ra'u ish et achiv, a person could not recognize the face of his brother, which is the same language hovering over the Ark of the Covenant. But here, this is understood as the deepest abyss, to look into the face of the other and not recognize that this person is your brother. No familiarity, no tingle of empathy for their groping in the dark, whether for fear or anger or self-preservation. A face was just a face in the darkness. That is the plague. And this instruction for the cover of the ark, this is the antidote, the resolution, the rejection and repair of that moment. A new agreement to turn toward the face of the other and to find there someone that you might even call your own sibling. Find their humanity. The conversation tonight about what's happening in this country for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers and what we can do to help, it's political, it's analytical, it's societal, it's ethical, It's about our well-known call to care for the stranger because we were strangers in the land of Mitzrayim, but at its core, it is a conversation about humanity, our ability to look another human being in the face and to see with easy empathy the pain, the hopes, the fear, and the heart of our own brother or sister or sibling, to embrace how our tradition guides us to see clearly how another person's suffering or their thriving or their safety is bound up with our own. And to know that when we can see another human being with that love, through that lens, there we might find God's presence unfettered. It is my honor now to introduce our speaker, Isabel Burton. At HIAS, Isabel oversees initiatives that enable the American Jewish community to act in support of refugees through public events, volunteer and educational opportunities, and grassroots advocacy. Prior to joining HIAS, Isabel worked in nonprofit management, community organizing, and community development, both in congregational settings and in agencies in the US and UK. And maybe most importantly, Isabel is CBE family. Welcome.
I forgot to print out the first page of what I wanted to say, so I'm going to cheekily use my, technology. Shabbat. Apologies. Okay. Hi, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So nice to be here. So the last time I stood at the Beamer at CBE was actually a year ago, because when my son became bar mitzvah, by total coincidence, this Shabbat's Torah portion is the one and the same Pasha that he read, Terumah. I will loop back to that in a little bit, but everything feels particularly resonant and emotional for me this evening. Maybe that's also because of what's happening in the world. So I was asked by Rabbi Steph to talk a little bit before I talk about HIAS and what we do and how you can get involved and everything, how and why I got involved in this work. So I'll just very briefly touch on that. So I've always been fascinated by being the other. Growing up in South London as a Jew, there were very few of us around, and I actually really quite liked being that special, something slightly extra or special. And I was also a middle child of 3 sisters, and so I was always driven to take the side of the underdog and sort of fight for justice. So I feel like that's the sort of 2 piece, the Jewish piece and the middle sister piece. So later on, I ran a small non-profit in London that worked with kids, and many of them were first-generation immigrants, and it was about them trying to understand where they lived and how they could get power, and it was very much sort of community organizing, although community organizing didn't exist in the UK at the time. It's a very US-centric initiative or thing. And anyway, I moved out here around 15 years ago, and I looked around and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know anything about the community here, but I do know Jews. So I came, actually, my congregational experience is working here. I worked here for 3 years as a community, social justice person. I overlapped with Cantor Josh for a few years. And I did things like I helped set up the homeless shelter and worked on the response to Hurricane Sandy. Anyway, cut forward many years. My role at HIAS really does combine all of the pieces. It's kind of like my dream job. I think for many people, they have an idea about what they want to be working in and how they want to be living their life. And I feel like I sort of do that very much most days, even though I wish it was a little bit more boring. So right now we are really steeling ourselves for what this administration is doing for the organization, for the refugee resettlement program, for asylums, for our country. So I'm going to address that a little bit. So now I can. Woe to our country if to be human becomes a heroic act. Elie Wiesel, the Holocaust survivor and the prophetic voice of moral consciousness in the second half of the 20th century, delivered these words. But he did not deliver them on Yom HaShoah or on International Holocaust Remembrance Day. He preached them in 1985 in Tucson, Arizona, at a conference for the nascent sanctuary movement. This movement of community activists, faith leaders, and legal advocates emerged as it became clear that the US government was systematically deporting people back to the persecution and violence that they fled in Central America, in spite of our articulated national commitment to refugees and asylum seekers. Woe to our society if to be human becomes a heroic act. Elie Wiesel's moral authority derived from the horror of persecution he faced as a Jew. If he had any reservations about falsely equating the atrocities of the Holocaust to the persecution of regimes half a century later and half a world away, he did not make that known. Often, people and the governments that represent us possess an uncanny ability to contextualize, excuse, or ignore gross violations of our core principles when they fail a test of political expediency. But those who are often most deeply scarred by such horrors possess less tolerance for equivocating nuance. Woe to our society if to be human becomes a heroic act. His admonition would feel prophetic in any era. Today, at this point, it hits so incredibly hard. The government that initiated the refugee admissions program with unanimous bipartisan support, that celebrated our national identity as the inevitable conclusion of hard-working immigrants, feels unrecognizable when leaders now in power, bolstered by their followers, demonize, dehumanize, and reject the pleas of the vulnerable. Woe to our society indeed. In recent years, our leaders have found increasingly creative ways to choke off access to the human rights we once sought to champion. January 20th accelerated a trend that was already firmly taking root. What we now face is devastating. The US Refugees Admission Program has been shut down. Essential programs providing clean water, shelter, medical care, and other critical services around the world have been suspended. Just within HIAS's realm of services, this translates to 450,000 people globally no longer receiving our services. This is including 2,000 new arrivals in the US left without support they were counting on. 53,000 people fleeing conflict in Sudan won't have access to life-saving care in Chad. 13,000 people in Costa Rica will no longer receive legal protection services to help them access employment, medical care, education, etc. And the list goes on, and I am not going to list it out. There have been a flurry of announcements since the inauguration that strip away protections from those who most need it. Among these decisions include a national emergency declared at the border to both deploy active duty troops and allow for the construction of the border wall, of which I believe you have been on a delegation with HIAS and seen that there is already a border wall. The end of humanitarian parole programs that established a safe and careful controlled pathway for certain populations to live and work in the United States, such as Ukrainians, Haitians, Venezuelans, Nicaraguans, and Cubans. Sharply and dramatically increasing the capacity for deportation of immigrant communities, effectively ending asylum for people fleeing violence and persecution, and a great deal more, all of which is announced with dehumanizing and vitriolic rhetoric about immigrant communities, as well as conspiracy theories about an invasion, which are untrue and dangerous. There are vitally important debates and conversations society should have about where and how we make these investments and what limits or constraints are prudent. But what is happening now is not that. It's not a corrective to overreach or a reset of a broken system. It is cruelty enacted as policy. When I pause and actually let myself think about the people behind the statistics, it is hard to stay strong. The Afghans who risked their lives to help Americans, who continued to live in dangerous conditions, hoping, waiting in desperation and fear to come to the US, only to be told that they cannot board the plane. The families who risk everything because they had no other choice, making the treacherous journey through the Darien Gap and coming north before waiting in line for months with their CBP1 appointment, doing everything the right way, only to have it cancelled as they approached the border for their appointment. And the Haitian man and his son who fled after getting shot and almost kidnapped, stripped of their humanitarian parole status and left in legal limbo, vulnerable to deportation. It is devastating and overwhelming and disorientating. And that is the point. The shock and awe tactics are designed to leave us feeling hopeless and powerless. And we will not give in to the woe that our society has reached, but to draw from every ounce of agency and moral clarity we have as Jews to bring our humanity into a deeply broken world. It is the message that drives HIAS's mission. As we often say at HIAS, we used to fight refugees and immigrants because they were Jewish. Now we do so because we are Jewish and we are obligated to do so. So we stand today with our immigrant neighbors and with refugees striving to find safety in the US. We stand today against ripping families apart, against stripping people of their right to even go before an immigration judge to tell their side of the story, against the grave economic impact these terrible decisions will have, against allowing ICE to raid schools and places of worship, against cutting off federal funds to help refugees who are already in the United States or who have been cleared, after more thorough vetting than anyone else entering the US to make a new life here. That is why HIAS is fighting in the courts against these cruel, misguided cuts. We are part of 2 lawsuits where we are suing both to reinstate the Refugee Resettlement Program and the US State Department funding for overseas humanitarian aid. It is a long fight, but we are in it. Compared to the Biden administration, ICE is apprehending and detaining more individuals on average and per day in the interior of the US, and a higher proportion than before do not have criminal records, unlike what the man in the White House would like you to think. Customs and Border Patrol is releasing fewer and fewer people on their own recognizance who enter between ports of entry. In fact, the majority of people who attempt to cross either at a port of entry or between are now being expelled immediately back into Mexico, whether or not they want to claim for asylum. Today, they are not getting that chance at all. Because of this, the current administration has not yet been detaining a higher rate than the previous one. However, it's reported that this month, ICE detention facilities around the US are at 109% capacity, with close to 42,000 migrant detainees. This means that ICE will have to expedite and increase removals of detainees to catch up with the rate they are apprehending people. We've certainly seen a significant increase during Trump of the rate of people being deported to third-party countries such as Costa Rica, Mexico, and Panama, and that they are not nationals of. It also means that this administration is opening up more detention centers, not just in Guantanamo. You might have also heard about the imminent reopening of a 1,000-bed privately run detention center in Newark, New Jersey, just around the corner. Folks rounded up in the greater New York City area will likely be taken there first before deportation. We've also heard that Mayor Adams announced he would issue an executive order allowing ICE to open up an office on Rikers Island. However, this is currently not legal. New York City law bars any city personnel or property from being used to help ICE detain people without a proper judicial warrant. So Mayor Adams has not actually issued an executive order, and ICE is not actually operating on Rikers, at least not yet. But the threat of loss of huge amounts of federal funding if New York City does not cooperate does hang over the city. So, how can you help? As always, what powers highest is the strength of our base and your willingness to help, to advocate, and speak up. We need your action now more than ever, and I know so many of you are already doing so many things. That's a huge part of what makes this community so special. Still, I'd like to offer some places where we could use some help. We know that the diversity of our city is one of the things that makes it so unique and so interesting. Supporting our neighbours is such an important part of who we are. There are so many ways to do that. Joining a rapid response network. These are often hyper-local efforts that respond in real time to immigration enforcement actions by showing up on site and bearing witness, and accompanying individuals to deportation hearings, ICE check-ins, and other appointments. Several immigrant rights organizations have programs that facilitate volunteers providing moral support and comfort to individuals as they comply with the law and navigate often complicated legal issues. And I know that Bonnie and others will be able to help you direct you towards them. There's HIAS's action guide, which can be downloaded online. You can consider amplifying HIAS's statements, action alerts, resources, and then you can contact Congress to demand our representatives continue to shed light on the unprecedented assault on our humanitarian system. Locally, there are some state bills. I'm going to say what they're called and then not talk about them in detail because I don't want to overstay my welcome. But they are the Empire State Licensing Act, which aims to provide undocumented New Yorkers with the opportunity to obtain different licenses. New York for All, a citywide sanctuary bill. Access to Representation Act, which is attempt to get representation for all migrants who don't currently have a right for representation. And obviously, your donations are incredibly helpful in order to sustain all of this this litigation, the advocacy, and the life-saving programs. But before I finish, I do want to say briefly that I want to loop back to our Pasha, Terumah. As I learned from my son Azai last year, much of the Pasha includes boring lists of what God needed to build, what God needed to build for the Mishkan, the home for the Ten Commandments, items that the Israelites were meant to donate. But something stuck out for Azai. He felt that God made it clear that the Israelites should not be made to give these items, but that they should do so because they wanted to, out of their own kindness. He wrote in his Devar, God knew that the Israelites were in a tough moment as they wandered in the desert, so he wanted to help create community. He wanted his people to work together to build the Mishkan, to learn to lean on each other during the tough times that they were experiencing. It strikes me that this is what we all need, particularly at this moment, when it is hard not to feel despair as we stare down the fragility of a just society that we painstakingly cultivated. We need community to lead on. We need kindness. Throughout history, as Jews, we have often found ourselves in a place where no one is acting human, where we have cried out with Elie Wiesel, woe to our society if to be human becomes a heroic act. And yet, in every era, we commit again and again to strive towards our humanity. In this way, we remind ourselves of our capacity for kindness and our ability to rise, to help, even with our flaws, and that when we are what we are intended to be, we are good. Shabbat Shalom.
Yasher Koach, Isabel. Wow. You are such a wealth of information and wisdom and sobering reality, but also a bit of hope that we're not going to back off now. We're going to take our values and we're going to lean into the things that we can do. We're going to do them together. So just a few things that are CBE specific that will help us both get involved here and also make connections to the things that Isabel shared that Highest is leading on. Okay, there should be a piece of paper near your row that looks like this. If it's at the end of your row, you might pass it down to the people in your row. It has a QR code on it. If you are a person who uses a phone on Shabbat, you might go to this now, because I'm going to give you a quiz in just 1 second. And it'll be helpful if some of you have it open, only if you're comfortable. So the first thing to know that you can sign up for here, or you might already be signed up for, is tomorrow afternoon, Bonnie Kirker and I will be doing a Know Your Rights training here in this very chapel to protect immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees in and outside of our community. Come learn with us what we as allies can do. It is a lot. Come and be hopeful and effective together. 2, you'll find on this list is this amazing list of ways that you might have tools or resources to support refugees and asylum seekers, and you can check off any of the things that you have to offer. And then when a family reaches out to our Refugee Task Force chairs, or to me, or to anybody in the leadership of CBE, we will know that we can come to you because they have a need for a lawyer or furniture or something else. If you have it open, does anybody have it open? Yeah. Great. Call out something you see on that list. This is the quiz. It's really easy.
Help family find secure housing.
Secure housing. What else?
Help with resumes and job searches.
Amazing. Help with resumes and job searches. What else? One more. Great. Help somebody practice their English. These are things you all can do. We all have things that we can give of ourselves to help somebody else feel like they have been able to come home and find their home. The bottom of that list, you'll see, I would like to join the Refugee Task Force list. That's how you'll stay in touch. That's how we'll keep telling you more and more things as they come up, as we figure out other ways to help and be part of this story. There's also a way to, of course, to continue signing up for food delivery, which we do regularly, and you can find that in the weekly. And we are grateful to Isabel for sticking around at the Oneg to answer all the questions. She speaks very quickly, like a good New Yorker, and then you packed a lot in there. And if you have a lot of questions, which I, of course, do, you can meet her at the Oneg. Okay, as we wrap up and move into the conclusion of our service this evening, in a time of greater vulnerability and fear and attack and instability on immigrants here and support work abroad, we pray, may we be a community that keeps finding ways to truly see the face and the heart of the other. May we find there both God and humanity. Amen.